Hello everyone, what is up, and welcome back to Warhammer Dark Omen Mission 12 in Sylvania. Now, this mission is not the most exciting of missions. It can be quite difficult, and in fact it is really rather difficult if you don't know very much about the lore of Warhammer, as it drops a new enemy type on you. And this new enemy type is very difficult to deal with what you have at this point in the game. Becomes a lot less of a concern, and surprisingly also a lot less used in the later missions of the game. But in this mission it can be a real challenge if you don't know what you're doing. So without further ado, let's get this underway.
Bernhardt, what are you doing here? Indulging in swordplay with greenskins while the undead legions march across the Empire?
Just passing the time.
You, cannon and mortar crews, stay where you are!
Taking up war as a profession now, witch hunter?
As a representative of the Emperor, I am commandeering one of those war engines for the mission to Sylvania. Now, cannon or mortar? Which one shall I choose?
You don't. I choose.
I won't stand here bandying words with you. I have an urgent mission to fulfill. I must leave immediately.
More heretics to burn?
You'll end up in hell, Bernhardt!
I was born there.
Commander, I must return the steam tank to Altdorf. Thank you for your help.
Don't mention it. Klaus, we resume the march to Sylvania and Castle Drachenhof. Undead horde waiting up ahead. Launch the assault!
So I think it goes without saying, you all probably saw, and I did mention in the previous mission, we were going to be keeping the mortar. We already have a cannon, and the mortar offers a different style of artillery support to augment our already present cannon. You can take two cannons and you have slightly better cannon presence, but the mortar is very useful because you can place it in cover and have it fire out of cover. Now, I'm deploying very carefully here, and the first half of this mission is going to be rather boring as a result of this careful deployment. You may notice the units that you have vision of are 2 regiments of archers as well as a new icon. This banner represents a vampire lord, but the vampire lord behaves much like a necromancer, just a much tougher necromancer.
Target received!
The very first thing you want to do is bombard the archers, because you're actually in range of them. You're not in range of them from where they are currently stood, but what will happen is they'll slowly walk up the bank, and they can actually bombard you from there. So it's very important that you prioritise taking those out before you advance up the map. Both regiments have to be destroyed, so it's important that you make sure you watch how they move, because you can see this one's moving further away, but sometimes they'll turn around and then move closer towards you, in which case they'll shoot back. So alternate your fire between the regiments of archers, making sure that you strike whichever one is most likely to be shooting at you, because left ignored skeleton archers will very quickly make short work of your artillery. And we're going to be needing them for the rest of this game, so we can't be losing them. Now, I do make one mistake in this mission, and that is I leave the Grudgebringer sword on the Grudgebringer cavalry. The new enemy type introduced in this mission, which I'll talk about during this sort of bombardment lull, is the Wraith. Now, the Wraiths come in small units. They're a bit like flagellants in that regard. They're very, very tough fighters. Now, the interesting properties about them is they are resistant, not immune, to the regiment being broken. So if you flank a regiment, it can still break and retreat, but they are resistant to fear in the traditional sense. They are completely immune to non-magical damage, except for when the unit is routed, in which case non-magical damage can kill them, because of the way this game in particular is coded.
Open fire!
But yeah, and the only magical weapon that we have, other than obviously the Bright Wizard himself, is the Grudgebringer sword. So it's important to move that weapon onto our infantry, which we placed in the south, so that they can deal with the Wraiths. I forget to do that in this mission, and I rely instead on routing the first unit of Wraiths, which does work out, but it's a bit of a gamble, so I wouldn't recommend you do it.
Target received! Target received!
So as I promised, endless bombardment.
Open fire! Aye, sir.
You have to fight 3 units of Wraiths within this mission. And so, with only one magical weapon, it can be really quite difficult. You can hurt them with the Banner of Wrath, but it's not a magical weapon, so it won't augment the individual unit's attacks during melee. This mission is divided into a number of unique individual triggers for when the units actually spawn in. They're not present on the map, they actually spawn in as you hit certain points and advance past certain areas.
Target received!
You want to make sure, as you saw there, that you hit the Vampire Lord's tower with the artillery. That gives us a new magical weapon. It behaves a lot like the Grudgebringer sword in that it allows you to cast a fireball once per magic cycle.
Sighted.
It changes the unit's damage type to magical, but it doesn't do the double strike effect of the Grudgebringer. It is actually a slightly weaker Grudgebringer sword.
Aye, sir.
I believe it's called the Hellfire Blade, but don't quote me on that. This game has a surprisingly active community that operates largely in German. Lots of the resources that I link to have some English translation, but the majority of the stuff is in German. So if you can speak German, go for it. So by slowly moving the flagellants forward, we've triggered one of the many regiments of Ghouls on this map to advance towards us. And because they're retreating, they're very easy to just pick off. These Ghoul units are quite large. They contain quite a lot of bodies, but you can easily rout them and then just whittle them down with very little effort. Whenever the Vampire Lord comes into sight, you want to retarget him with your artillery. He's a very powerful magic caster, a much more amped up necromancer. Leaving him alive can be very, very dangerous. The cavalry I used as a sort of a width marker. I put them up there both to protect the artillery in case the AI does something very funky and just goes to the north side of the bank. They shouldn't, but sometimes they do. And they're not really going to be playing active part for this first phase, which is why really I would recommend moving the Grudgebringer sword off of them. They're just there to give me a sort of a reference for where I should place my artillery. As you can see, I have the cavalry as north as I could, then the mortar directly below them, and then the cannon slightly to the west of that. Now, it's a good way of gaining a reference so you can deploy in the same way and get similarly consistent results. We've just hit about 10 minutes of just bombarding.
Forward.
Wow.
Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord.
So once again, we're just going to creep the flagellants
Yes, my
forward.
Forward.
They're actually a unit that does very well with the Grudgebringer sword if you want to experiment, because of the double strike effect and the naturally high damage of the flagellants, and the fact that they don't really feel fear. They're a great unit to actually use to combat Wraiths if you can get some experience on them and get them leveled up a bit.
Forward. Enemy sighted.
But I think the most interesting thing for me
Enemy
is that
sighted.
they introduce this
Enemy
unit
sighted.
type of Wraiths, and they don't really use it too often. There are a couple of missions that use Wraiths, but
Target received.
they don't utilize this mechanic that they
Target
introduce to you
received.
quite strongly at this mission. By the time you
Target
get all the
received.
magical weapons to be like,
Yes,
oh, it's Wraiths, okay, you
Open
don't see
fire.
them very often at all. So I was taking shots at the Wraith purely because I had nothing else to do. As soon as that Ghoul regiment moves into range, you really want to re-target towards the Ghouls. Like that. You can shoot at the Wraith when they're marching in a line like that, because lots of the missed shots at Wraiths will actually hit the Ghouls. As you can hear.
Target received. Target
So there is
received.
one other magical item on this mission, and it is the Wand of Jet. Very good magical item if you're going to be using wizards for your playthrough. It reduces the casts of all your magic by 1 magic point to a minimum of 1. You can't have things that you can cast for free.
Enemy sighted. Open fire.
So here, because I don't have a unit with a magical weapon, the flagellants are telling me that the weapons pass through it, and this would be the first point in the game that you'd learn that. It doesn't tell you at any point. So I get the infantry behind him, and I charge, hoping for a rout. And I get very lucky, and I get it.
Engaged.
As you can see, I was not counting on the rout, so I was about to move my cavalry down.
Yes, my lord. Target received. Target received. Open fire.
So you can just see the sword spinning there because I set the tower on fire. I'll wait there till the end of the mission. This is where the archer unit starts to get a bit cheeky and starts to walk up the bank. They're actually going to pick up the sword, of all things, but I see that and I think, oh no, they're coming to shoot me. You're thinking it's only 1 archer, but you'd be surprised how the dice can fall in this game, and everything is going so well in a battle that you know inside and out, and then suddenly it's not going well at all. Because of the permanent death nature of the game, you kind of need to know what your plan is going to be by the end of the game, and sort of play the game according to that.
Target received.
This was actually my first successful clear of the game, so this is something I'm saying retrospectively and didn't have in my mind when I was doing these missions.
Open fire.
You may have seen in some of the comments that I've been receiving, thank you for those comments by the way, but you may have seen in some of the comments that I've been receiving that I talk about funneling too much experience into the cannon or the cavalry, which are already at max level,
Enemy sighted.
and letting them get too many kills, which means my regiments are a lot weaker in the late game. You'll actually see that come into play. And the 5 hours that it took me to beat the last mission of the game, don't worry, the video's not 5 hours, I just mean in terms of numbers of failed attempts.
Forward.
It really influences
Yes,
the importance of spreading out that experience a lot more.
Target received.
So at this point, with the archers more or less taken care of, we retarget to the Vampire Lord and we start to push up. Now I'm pushing up with all mobile units and I'm making sure I maintain this sort of formation.
Forward.
Bright Wizard is always useful to have whenever there's Wraiths on the field, because he can just chip them down a little bit, make them a bit softer. The crossbowmen have the Shield of Tolos, so that if I spot a ranged unit, I can actually have them have a firefight with that ranged unit and they'll very confidently win. Otherwise, because the crossbowmen suffer from a shorter range, they tend to lose ranged battles with other ranged units, just because they take so much damage before they even get into firing range.
Aye, sir. Aye, sir. Open fire! Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord. Forward! Enemy sighted! Yes, my
So
lord.
we've just spawned in another
Enemy
regiment of
sighted.
Wraiths and some Ghouls.
Forward! Yes, my lord. Target lost! Target lost! Forward! Halt! Aye, sir. Enemy sighted! Target received! Open fire! Forward!
And with that, the Vampire Lord is taken care of, and we don't have to worry about him. You heard the sound of a magical item being dropped. That was
Engage.
the Wand of Jet,
Yes, my lord.
which I've already
We
described.
fear the enemy! To arms! Charge! We're under attack! Our weapons pass through it! Charge! Watch your fire!
Very interesting little audio glitch there. You can have these screams suddenly change up in pitch when another sound effect plays with it. So you get that weird sort of normal scream into a really high-pitched scream. Not entirely sure why it happens, I just know when it happens.
Charge! Our weapons pass through it! Our weapons pass through it!
So because their weapons pass through it, we're really just going to try to strengthen the cavalry here. It's really only the cavalry that are going to win against that unit. But our infantry, of course, are doing exactly what we want them to.
Aye, sir. Charge! Our weapons pass through it!
Now, the retreating direction of the Imperial Greatswords is less than ideal,
Forward!
because they run upwards, which is going to hit the triggers for everything else, and it kind of means I now have to just play
Charge!
a lot
Yes, my lord.
more
Fear the
aggressively than I thought I would.
Forward! Forward!
But as you can see, the Wraiths
Aye, sir.
at this point in the game are very difficult to deal with,
Aye, sir.
because you've got these
Yes,
regiments, but and they're all quite capable fighting regiments. You know, the Imperial Greatswords and the Flagellants are both very, very strong. They get absolutely buttered
Aye,
by
sir.
4 Wraiths just
Yes,
because
my
they
lord.
don't have the magical weapons, which is why I recommend moving the Grudgebringer's sword.
Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord. Yes, my lord.
because the regiment's quite slow, if you're feeling creative, feeling a bit clever, you can try to kite them with the Bright Wizard a lot more and actually pick up some experience on the Bright Wizard for a change. And that's also beneficial. As units level up, they can carry more magical items, which is particularly pertinent for the Bright Wizard, who you're going to really want to have hold as many magical thingy-majigs as you possibly can, because the magical items for the wizards in this game are very, very good.
Aye, sir.
So I'm taking this moment to set up a formation. I wouldn't normally, but because we got so battered and because of the way the units ran and took a lot of casualties, I want to trigger this in a very specific way and then handle the spawns in a very specific way.
Enemy sighted! Yes, my lord. Forward! Target received! Forward!
So I'm moving the cavalry in a very specific way as well. I want them
Sighted.
positioned on the west here, so that we get that other spawn, and then a little bit of Bright Wizard intervention here to help us out.
Target lost! Enemy sighted! Enemy sighted! Open fire!
Yep,
Charge!
just when you thought it was all done, there is yet another regiment of Wraiths. That's what I mean. They introduce this mechanic to you really, really quite forcefully, and then really don't utilize it as much as they should for the rest of the game.
Aye, sir. We're under attack! Attack!
So I positioned the Grudgebringer infantry to try and get as many Banner of Wrath hits on their unit as possible.
Charge!
Get a little bit of friendly fire in there, because once again I'm terrible at telling my units to hold fire.
Charge!
And we are really now just in the final grand melee of the mission.
Forward! Our weapons pass through it! Charge!
So pay very close attention. I'm making sure that they didn't actually join it, but I'm making sure they charged the melee with units they could actually hurt. Otherwise the crossbows would have also just taken a lot of futile casualties.
Yes, my lord. Engage! Our weapons pass through it! Charge!
And now all that remains is to get the only unit that can actually hurt Wraiths to rout them and then kill them.
We're under attack! Attack! We are victorious! Yes, my lord. Retreat!
What surprised me is something there triggered them to retreat because they took a lot of damage as well. I don't know why that happened, but it did.
Received.
They were charging a routing unit and took damage from doing that. So
Yes, my lord.
I don't know what happened there. I don't know if they both hit a retreat trigger at the same time and it just caused a weird glitch, but caused a lot of damage. Anyway, I'm going to speed up this last little bit because it's just me picking up magical
Yes, my
items. And that is this mission done.
Forward! Over!
Wow, that was mission 12. And yeah, the Wraiths pose an interesting challenge because they can only be hurt by magical items, and at this point in the game you only have a few. And even then, you know, the only one that you were guaranteed to have is the Grudgebringer sword. So you can miss a lot of those items and therefore be even harder up for ability to deal with the Wraiths, which, you know, this mission can really, really challenge people. Anyway, as always, like, share the video, leave a comment, subscribe, let me know what you'd like to see me do in future videos. Bye for now.